Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. This is one of those shows I found myself struggling to write an introduction for. I've seen a lot of anime with great fight scenes, a lot of anime that are really heavy on the power of friendship, and I even seem to, mostly accidentally, gravitate towards a lot of series that end up being about human experimentation. But nothing I've come across in the past has ever felt quite like Canaan, and while I'll be the first to support that one idea can be done well multiple times, in multiple ways, there is something satisfying about coming across a story that feels original. There are 5 or 6 different sides to this story, places we could start. Where we will start is with Maria Osawa, a young woman who's recently become a photojournalist. Our story begins with her first real job, accompanying a more experienced journalist to Shanghai. This older co-worker is Minoru Minorikawa, but anytime he's addressed by name throughout the series, everyone tends to take Maria's lead and shorten it to just Mino. They were actually there to report on an upcoming anti-terrorism conference, but they venture out to attend a local festival on their first night. Here, they run into a group of people in masks, whose brains essentially explode if the masks are ever taken off. The first episode opens the series on a really strong note, with Maria musing about how often people close their eyes to things they don't want to see, and how she's determined to see the world for what it really is. It's her main motivation for becoming a journalist. The festival scene is one of those scenes that's really great because of the contrast. It's this upbeat celebration until one of the men gets his mask knocked off, but the people around him think, or choose to think, that his jumping around, writhing in pain is just dancing, and join in, continuing on without him after he collapses on the ground. Maria thinks it's all fun and games too, until she stops to take a picture of this man and has that realization moment of, holy shit, this guy is dead. Their investigation links these people to a village whose inhabitants all mysteriously disappeared one day, and a government cover-up. Currently, the survivors of this experiment are at the mercy of a terrorist organization known as Snake, and the complications are just beginning. They come to find out these people are dealing with side effects of the UA virus, something Maria's quite familiar with, as, until now, she was the only known survivor of it. A few years earlier, back in Japan, this virus had been used in some kind of terrorist attack. It was 100% lethal until Maria's father, this genius but now retired chemist, managed to create an antivirus to save his daughter. The details on that backstory are brief, something I'll come back to later, largely because Maria's blocked out most of her memories of the event. An important detail, though, is that the antivirus was never developed further, put through testing to create a mass-produced cure for the public. Snake's been able to work out the cure well enough to come up with their own drug to keep their experimental soldiers alive, but it has to be taken regularly, which also may have been a purposeful change as it keeps them reliant on Snake. There were 2 outcomes for the subjects of this experiment. The people who can't survive without the special masks are known as unblooms, people whose bodies rejected the virus entirely. What the virus was intended to do was mutate the subjects' bodies so they'd end up with abilities that could potentially be weaponized. The subjects considered a success are known as borners, but it's not hard to see why this project was abandoned. Aside from the ethical reasons, these borners are still dependent on medication to survive, and there was no way to predict what abilities someone would end up with. So they sometimes got someone like Hako, whose voice alters sound waves to melt people's brains. A powerful weapon, for sure, but her character also introduces another shortcoming, that none of these people signed on to be soldiers, and she's so traumatized by her experiences that she never speaks at all anymore. And sometimes they'd get someone like Yun, who got no special powers. The mutation just grew her a second appendix, and they keep her around to run odd jobs. On another note, though, Yun was really one of those surprise MVP characters. She's first introduced as comic relief, and I was honestly surprised to see her continue showing up after, episode 2. But once we get to know her better, after she befriends Maria, she became a really sympathetic character. Her whole life has been defined by this experiment. It stole her childhood, and she's been treated as a disposable errand girl ever since. It's become sort of a defense mechanism, almost, for her to try and accept that her life is worthless. But all Maria sees is how hard she works, holding down like 5 or 6 jobs and getting by in a rundown little houseboat, trying to salvage a life that was ruined by forces out of her control. It takes that friendship. Someone who's so impressed by her good qualities that her shortcomings are practically invisible, to finally convince Union that she's allowed to dream and fight back and want better for herself. She becomes someone who'll do anything to help her new friends, and just thinking back on where her story went is making me emotional again. But before we get into character discussions, we're still missing a whole other half to this story. Investigating this mystery gets Maria in the crosshairs of some very dangerous people, which ends up reuniting her with an old friend. Canaan is a girl about her age who's never known a life other than being a soldier. She saved Maria from some men who were harassing her on one of her travels in the past. They haven't kept in touch since then. They live in 2 very different worlds. But the meeting left an impression on both of them, and they pick back up and explore that friendship further now. More on that later. Canaan was orphaned in some war-torn country as a young girl. She was taken in and raised by a professional soldier named Siam, who we later learn may have been officially tasked with creating the perfect soldier. But he never gave her any reason to doubt he took her in for motives other than the goodness of his heart, so her upbringing was unorthodox, but not cold. There was love there. So she's had the best possible training from a very young age. But that's not all. The virus experiments were being carried out in an attempt to create abilities similar to something Canaan can do naturally. She has, well, they're calling it synesthesia, but that's a fun little side note actually. Synesthesia is a real condition where sometimes people's senses get crossed in the brain. For some, hearing certain sounds or words has corresponding tastes or smells. The most common form muddies the definition a little, actually, because it's not 2 separate senses. In grapheme color synesthesia, the connection is between letters, or numbers, and colors, which I would qualify as both falling under sight, but this is the one I've done the most research on, because it's the one I have personal experience with. A very small percentage of synesthetes actually see the color projected onto the words written out, but for most of us, it's just this inherent knowledge of what color a letter is supposed to be. I can remember being in kindergarten when the class was being taught our letters and staring at the big green C our teacher had written on the whiteboard and just feeling like something was wrong, because clearly C's are yellow, how could she not know that? But it's worth noting that the experience is entirely subjective to each individual synesthete. Someone out there right now might be bristling at my explanation because to them C's are blue. For the most part, it's an aspect of life that's just there for me. It's never been too distracting or particularly useful. I've read about some people who are able to use it as a memory tool, though the only personal example that comes to mind is the opposite of that. A's are red and 5s are red, so to this day, whenever I see May dates written out in numerical form, there's a moment where I mistake them for April dates. My point is, synesthesia is a condition that's kinda cool, but mostly harmless and inconsequential. It is not the magical superpower this show makes it out to be. Canaan can apparently reroute her senses at will, though that's an aspect of the ability I wish they'd explained a lot more. We really only see it called attention to once. While the gang's taking down the factory where the experiments were conducted, one of our villains sets off a device that sends out these sound waves that deafen everyone else. But Canaan's still affected by Hako's voice because she can convince her brain to see sound instead. But mostly, she sees people's emotions as colors. They're surrounded by these colored auras like a cloud. She can see it at a distance and through walls, too. She doesn't even have to be talking to the person to see what they're feeling. Hatred and killing intent radiates blue, so it's an ability that's been saving her life for as long as she's been aware of it. But there's one person who's mysteriously without color, who she struggles to fight. Alphard is the leader of Snake. She also trained under, and appeared to be raised by, Siam in the past, and we find out fairly early she's the one who killed him. Her backstory is something I wish the series had spent more time on, because I'm still a little hazy on what feels like some pretty important details. Did they willingly go their separate ways when their views started to differ? Or did he ditch her after he took Canaan under his wing? Was she just the rough draft to his perfect soldier project? What we do know is that he told her, pretty flat out, that Canaan had the potential to be more powerful than she ever would, so Alphard is determined to bring her to that potential, and then take her down anyway. To the dismay, and then rage, of one of her subordinates, Alphard is pretty single-minded towards this feud with Canaan. She's honestly never that interested in the test subjects, or any of Snake's plans, which I think is why, though they were definitely connected, these two sides to the story felt really separate. I kept waiting for Canaan and Alphard to have a more personal connection to the experiments, but it really felt like background noise to their story with each other, and Canaan's relationship with Maria feels like a third storyline that only loosely connects back to the others, for all that they take place at the same time involving the same characters. They were all really good, emotional, moving stories, but I am left feeling like there was something missing here at the end. I would say the two girls are the heart of this story, but there were so many characters who brought this one to life and pulled at my heartstrings. I already mentioned Yoon Yoon. Mino also undergoes some impressive growth from start to finish. He starts out only looking to make a name for himself as a journalist, but ends up getting so attached to his subjects that it changes the type of story he wants to write. It was sweet to see him go from viewing Maria as a pest to genuinely caring about her. And not just her physical and emotional well-being, but he starts teaching her some of the hard lessons involved with being a good journalist too, something he'd been really unenthusiastic about on the plane ride over here. And he's really affected by Hako's story, and her relationship with her ex-soldier boyfriend, who's too haunted by his role in her suffering to consider that she might actually love him. Just really great character stories all around, but most of the focus is on Maria and Canaan. Despite the evidence of all the crazy things she can do, for a while Maria's determined to see Canaan as just a normal girl. As we get into Maria's head a bit more, we start to see that this might be a bit of a defense mechanism, a way for her to avoid acknowledging that they come from two very different, not quite compatible worlds. Not to mention that Canaan's so skilled and confident, and Maria doesn't think there's anything special about her in comparison, but Maria really shines throughout this story for her kindness. Canaan reveals at one point that when she looks at Maria, she's always surrounded by this sort of golden light, and something about that just feels right. And on the flip side, there's something freeing for Canaan to be treated like an ordinary person. She's never gotten to just relax and have fun before, like she does during her outings with Maria. What Maria wants most is to find some way she can stand beside Canaan as an equal, rather than having to be rescued every time things get tough. But she was a really important influence on Canaan over the course of this journey, the one that gave her the tools to finally stand up to Alphard, in appreciation of what's really important. Siam preached to them both that relying on hatred as a motivation would inevitably be their downfall, and that certainly proves true the first time these two fight. With nothing but thoughts of revenge for Siam on her mind, Canaan is no match for Alphard. Maria teaches her to live, that life can be more than just her next assignment. And though there's a lot of focus on Maria's determination to see Canaan as just a normal girl being a shortcoming on her part, something she needs to overcome to accept Canaan for who she fully is, there's something beautiful about it too, Because while the harsher aspects of her life can't be ignored, no one else has ever been able to, or even tried to see, that Canaan could be more than an emotionless assassin. Their relationship, and the effects they have on each other, was a real high point of the series. Which leads into one last thing I can't leave you without mentioning. Canaan came out in 2009. To put it simply, it was a different time in the history of queer romances and storytelling. So, while this one is billed as a friendship story, and there are plenty of other great friendships throughout this series, there is no doubt in my mind that if our two main leads hadn't both been girls, there would have been nothing vague about their relationship being a love story. As it is, it's the type of love story I like to describe as everything but the kiss, because as much as I know how many people are out there who'll insist that there's no proof of a romance without an on-screen kiss, sometimes your characters reach a level of emotional intimacy where it really doesn't feel necessary anymore. And as much as I personally value strong platonic relationships in media and would like to see more of them, that's just not what I saw here. Canaan was a great show overall, engaging right from the start with a dark, eerie mystery at the center of its story and a cast of characters I got surprisingly attached to. Quite a few of the ones who really grew on me were characters I wasn't expecting much from at the start, not to mention the beautiful animation and fluid fight choreography. There were a couple of places it fell short. The various storylines felt like they could have been connected better at times, like a group of people who were all in the same room but having different conversations, and there were gaps in some of the backstories I kept expecting to get more information on. Interestingly, as I was doing some more research after the fact, I found that this anime is actually considered to be a sequel to a game that came out in 2008. It was released worldwide as of 2018 and can still be found on the PlayStation Store. I definitely plan on looking into it at some point. It doesn't look like it'll give me the explanations I'm looking for in regards to Alphard, but it does tell the story of Maria's encounter with the Uavirus terrorists, another backstory plotline that sounded really important when it was introduced, but didn't turn out to be of much consequence to the current day story. That said, I definitely recommend checking out the anime. Based on my own experience, I wouldn't say playing the game first is necessary to properly enjoy this story, but it does give you something to look into if, like me, you finish the anime and find yourself not quite ready to move on from these characters just yet. Thank you for watching.